And I'm basically doing this interview for school, and I really just am looking to collect information from both of you about your work overseas, and
It's only overseas for me.
Oh, right, it's overseas from me.
Okay, it is overseas for her.
And I'm curious about what you noticed to be the primary concerns of Uganda in the work that you do, and just know a little bit more about it. I think I don't understand.
Do you know anything about the political or the sociocultural trauma history?
A little, but I think I could.
Or the current crisis.
Yeah, I think I could use like a little description of what's alive there.
Should we start there?
Okay, just hold on a minute. Let me understand. You can pause it first.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Uganda as a country is.
Do you want to put that on?
I did. Yeah, I got it.
Is a country small in East Africa, and it has had its own history regarding like political instabilities, where power has always been taken up through the use of arms until 1985, where we started getting a kind of democratic and running elections to elect our presidents. But of course we still have one president since 85 till to date.
Wow.
And he's still our leader up to date. So the history of Uganda in terms of trauma is directly linked to the kind of political and insecurity fights, rebel activities that have claimed a number of lives, displaced a number of people, which directly impacts on their mental health and their psychological well-being. Until recently, we had a long war between the Lord's Resistance Army that lasted approximately 20 years in the northern part of the country, and that led to a crisis of internally displaced people who were residing in camps in northern and northeastern Uganda. This came through from 1985 until 2005, when the government engaged the rebels in peaceful negotiations, but it did not work out. So the army had to flush the rebels out of the country, and they ran to South Sudan, parts of Congo, and others ran up to the Central African Republic. So Uganda is currently a host to over 500,000 refugees.
Wow.
Who are located in different parts of the country. We have urban refugees and we have rural refugees. The rural refugees are basically in northern Uganda. The rural refugees are in northern Uganda and western parts of Uganda, and we have urban refugees that are in the central part of Uganda, that's in Kampala, within the city center. So getting to know about the lives, the psychological well-being of the refugees, as someone who is engaged in working with refugees, I am at the front lines of receiving refugees, and this is where we find a very high level of trauma among refugees. You identify them from the moment they come in, do interviews with them, and you can be able to, analyze the information, see the indicators of trauma amongst these refugees, and that's how we get to know somebody is being affected by the kind of life they have experienced during the time of displacement. So this happens at the border points where we take in refugees and then later on transfer them to the settlements. So basically that is the little I can be able to give, like a background to Uganda, its political context, and then what it has to do with refugees. So the refugees in Uganda are not only from Southern Sudan. We have refugees from Congo, we have refugees from South Sudan, we have refugees from Burundi, we have refugees from Somalia, even as far as Ethiopia. it's a host to a number of refugees, and it has the best refugee policy apparently worldwide, and most countries are coming to learn about the refugee policy that is in Uganda. So which has provided like a haven for refugees. That's why we find many refugees flocking into Uganda. So briefly, that is the background.
And do they come on their own accord? Like they come, how do they end up coming to you?
Now, we have humanitarian organizations. We have Office of the Prime Minister in Uganda, which is mandated with the responsibility of taking care of refugee welfare. We have the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, who are also in charge of monitoring refugee-related work in the refugee settlements. So these organizations work through other international and non-government organizations that operate within the refugee settlements. They are called implementing partners because UNHCR, as an international humanitarian organization, gives them funding to support the refugees through providing non-food items, the core relief items, shelter, food, and other basic needs. So these are the organizations that are at the front line of working with refugees, but they give funding and provide administrative support to ensure that we operate, or the lives of refugees are being taken care of by the humanitarian organizations. So how do the refugees get there to the refugee settlements? One, they come at the border points where we have collection centers, and then from the collection centers the registration takes place, and that's where you are able to identify who is a refugee and who is not a refugee, which country they are coming from, and then they take records of the refugees, and then they are tagged. They put for them tags before they are transported to a place that is called a reception center. At the reception center, it's like a home to thousands of refugees, where they can stay for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sometimes even a month.
Sir, can you turn your radio down a little bit because we're making a recording? Or this TV, can we turn this off?
Yeah. So where they are taken care of when the Office of the Prime Minister is trying to look for land where they can be allocated in the refugee settlements. So this usually happens when the new refugees have just come, because they are not taken directly to the settlement. They are kept in a place called a reception center, and that reception center, sometimes when the influx is high, could host more than 20,000 of refugees, and there is where you see very high levels of trauma. You see death occurring every now and then, and poor social services and disease outbreaks
Within the settlement?
within the reception center.
Within the reception center.
Exactly.
It's the first landing.
Yeah. So at the reception center, usually what happens is that you're given a few non-food items, and then you receive hot meals that are provided by humanitarian organization until Office of the Prime Minister identifies a plot of land. In Uganda, the policy is that they give you a piece of land which is 30 by 30, and that's where you're going to put up your house. If you have children, you'll put for them also their house there, and if you want to use the portion of the land to cultivate crops, that is the acreage or the measurement they give you in terms of land where you can be in position to construct. So when this is done, still the Office of the Prime Minister, together with other humanitarian organizations, will provide the needs that the refugees have in terms of the food, in terms of non-food items, the beddings, clothes, give them sanitary facilities, and then excavate for them pit latrines and provide them with whatever is needed to enable them to live a decent life in the refugee settlement. So that's what usually happens. Yeah.
And you said that this program is unique in that many people come to you as an example of refugee care. And in what ways do you feel that you're providing superior care for people?
Yeah, one thing that you need to know is that within the refugee camp, usually the focus is very little or even no focus at all on people who are manifesting with trauma and psychological problems. The priority of humanitarian organizations is focused on providing the basic needs and the social services that the refugees are in need of. But none of them, or even, let me say few of them, or none, provides the psychological services. Now, this is what is unique about my work with these refugees. I currently run groups for children, groups for women, especially those who have undergone sexual violence during transit, during the displacement period, and those who have been at the hands of the rebels. So this service is particularly important because, one, it brings the survivors of violence who are traumatized together to be in position to share and get to understand that whatever they feel is because of the kind of life that they went through. But even when they feel this, they are not alone. They come to the group and they share, they talk about these problems that affect them emotionally, psychologically, and also share how they are relating with their children, their husbands at home, in the refugee settlements. And it has created like kind of a healing process to enable them adjust to life in the refugee camp, appreciate and accept what has happened to them in the past, and this is helping them to keep together. So other than this, we always identify high rates of suicide in the refugee settlements, and this you can be able to relate it to the fact that in the refugee camp there are no psychological and psychiatric services. If there is, it is very minimal and with limited staff who are less qualified and less experienced in providing this service. Now, the beauty of the group therapy sessions that I have is that I get to identify them. People who have suicidal tendencies, people who are showing like they're depressed, they are sad, they are suffering with emotional and psychological problem, through a network of volunteers who help me to do the identification in the community. And this is how I manage to identify my clients, recruit them into the group, and then start sharing together with them. So that's how I do it.
And I'm curious, both in the you described some of the symptoms of trauma, but I wonder a little bit more about that, about the traumas that people come in with, and also the impact in terms of the healing that you notice, like what changes do you notice in people? So both like what do they come in with, and what do you notice the impact of the work that you do?
Yeah, usually what happens is that people come with the feelings of sadness, they isolate themselves, they are depressed, they don't want to associate with others and want to live in isolation without the presence of others because of shame, the feelings of guilt, which impact on their psychological well-being. But upon getting into contact in a group and talking about their problems and getting to know, so like another member other than me has a much more difficult problem than that one that I have, makes them to have a feeling that, okay, I'm not alone. We are part of a group. We have this for us to come together and share. We have this to help us to heal, and we have life ahead of us. So this usually happens in a way that upon recovery, they start, participating in some cultural activities. They do music, dance, and drama. They do, some handcrafts, handwork for themselves as a group. And this helps them also to become economically independent and access some of their basic needs when they sell off the small items that they make within the group. But that is not the priority. This comes in as a second benefit with them coming into the group, because as a humanitarian organization, we bring in the aspect of empowering the group members not only to come and attend and receive therapy, but also be in position to meet their household needs, and that is where the aspect of empowering them socioeconomically comes in place. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And do you notice with the staff that work there that they're impacted by the amount of trauma that the refugees experience as well?
Yeah. What I can say is that there is no care for caregivers when it comes to humanitarian work, and that is where this comes in place, because
the portable calm and the contemplative based stuff.
Yeah,
is where that comes in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you say more about that, Gaea? Well, since you're here too. Okay, you go first, and
okay,
and you fill in any gaps.
I also want to say it might be helpful to share with Jenna that you did do the WHO 5 on the kids group on the front end. Did you do a post?
I did the pre-test.
Yeah.
We are yet to do the post.
Okay, so you might want to share what those 5 questions are that we're looking for. The WHO has a 5 simple questionnaire that you can adapt for children or adults. It's like Isaac fell in love with it because it's like so
very
simple.
Simplified.
Oh, cool. Really simple. It's not complicated. You're not looking for symptoms. You're looking for well-being.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's on a Likert scale.
Oh, okay.
They're actually psychological well-being indicators. Very simplified. Yeah. So basically, with the portable calm practice, I got trained by Gaea on doing the portable calm, because I felt myself as a caregiver, I was being swallowed up in the trauma of my clients, because I see them every day. They come every day and talk to me, and just listening to them alone is enough to break me down. But I have to wake up the next day and I have to go in the same battlefield and re-experience the same things that I'm being told every day. Now, when I started learning the portable calm, first of all, I didn't have so much interest into it. I felt like it wouldn't help me so much because I felt everything was normal. But I got to realize that, yes, I started experiencing changes. Every time I practiced it, it kept me calm, it kept me relaxed. Even amidst interviewing a survivor of violence, a traumatized person, and listening to them talking, I was always able to put my focus onto the moment that I'm working with them, listen to the trauma, but not absorb it inside me, trying to create like a shield that I can listen to you, but I don't have to get affected by what you're telling me directly. But I have to feel compassion for the kind of problem you're going through, but not to let the problem affect me. Because ideally, you would start experiencing a lot of fatigue, psychosomatic complaints, and you get deviated from the work that you're supposed to do. You wake up in the morning and you're feeling a lot of headache. You feel like you shouldn't go there again, but that is the work that you're doing. So there is no way
you're going. Burnout.
Exactly. You go towards burnout.
And I think one of the things we teach in the portable calm is the difference between emotional contagion, empathy, and compassion. And so if you're using, from a neural perspective, the channels of empathy, basically humanitarian aid workers burn out in 3 years. That's it. You just can't do it. But compassion practice is actually a very different neural circuitry. There's far more space, and you don't end up wanting to withdraw or get swallowed up, as Isaac was saying. But you also don't want to avoid and pull away. So you're neither over-identifying nor are you avoiding. So it's really sort of based in those sort of Buddhist insights about what happens. And so the protocol, these contemplative-based practices for the humanitarian aid worker or the mental health professional, gives them a ground from which to work more skillfully. And we're there. I've been doing this work since the 70s, and I'm still doing it. I've beat the 3-year mark line.
Right.
But then the other piece to that is that then training those skills in the refugee camps for adults and children, but you could only somebody like Isaac, who actually is practicing, will I allow to teach those skills, because you got to put your own oxygen mask on first. You can't be teaching contemplative practices if you don't have a contemplative practice.
Exactly.
We can talk about what that is, at some point, but I want you to, I think this is, another thing that then gets implemented as a resource for recovery, a resource for resilience within the refugee camps. It's empowerment, but it's empowerment in the body, and especially for those who have been sexually traumatized, to be able to sort of reclaim their breath, their grounding, an internal sense of sanctuary, embodied mindful awareness practice, and compassion practice, even for their perpetrators. It's transformative.
And so you're noticing that you're doing this practice yourself, and also you're able to bring it to people in the refugee camp, refugees.
I had to do it for 8 weeks under constant supervision, and once I got to master the art of doing it, and having felt all that I've been able to describe, it's when I made a request to go ahead and start teaching it. And luckily, Gaea gave me an opportunity to go ahead, because I'd already come through the 8 week. She had already experienced, like, I had mastered the art of doing it, and I knew what to do. So she gave me a go ahead to go and start teaching it. So I started it with the team of staff that I work with, to make sure they are able to appreciate the portable camp practice, because they were suffering just like the way I was suffering. Actually, they were suffering more than I was suffering, because I supervised them. They are more at the field every day, receiving, resettling. At least for my case, I would visit like once in a while, and then another day I'm seated in the office. But theirs is every day. So I had to teach about 5 of my staff I started giving them to do, the breathing exercise every now and then trying to monitor and regulate, their senses, like their nervousness, a lot of things actually. So they stay focused, to be in position to, speak to the clients, listen to their problems, and then do the assessments.
And I wonder, what does a success story with a refugee look like? Like, you described some of the resiliency, but is it the case that you're working on the trauma directly, and then people stay in the refugee camp for life?
Yes.
Or they never leave? And so the growing refugee, it seems like the refugees are, over the last 20 years, have really, really, really been on the rise. In the text that I'm reading right now, it's just really a crisis in that way. And I wonder about anything that you guys think about that, or any ideas you have about what change looks like on a more systemic level to protect people and rights. I mean, I don't know if there's an answer, but I get curious.
Yeah, I will give you the success in 2 ways. One, I'll give you success on the side of a service provider, a caregiver, and then I'll give you a success on the side of the beneficiaries who get recruited into the group.
Okay.
Yeah, like how I was telling you from the beginning, I used to feel a lot of fatigue, burnout, and sometimes I feel like I should not get to the office because I am experiencing this kind of, things that are irregular. But it's coming to me because I am being affected by someone I am listening to on a daily basis. Like every day I listen to different women, different children talk about very difficult experiences, and that makes me unable to provide the service and also at the same time attend to myself. So that is one of the biggest successes me I have registered as an individual and a service provider or a caregiver, because it has helped me to be in position to regulate myself, be mindful of the feelings I have inside of me, be compassionate in providing the service, and then pass this on to the people who are having trauma. Now, on the other side of the persons I am working with, that is the trauma, like survivors of trauma, bringing them together as a group has been a good way to help them appreciate that, yes, even amidst displacement, there is still a place where we can come and mourn together and share our problems together, and there is someone who still cares for us. So as a caregiver, it's my responsibility to teach them how to be in position, you know, to practice, also absorb the portable calm when they start experiencing or re-experiencing things that are traumatic. They get to monitor their body sensations, they get to practice the breathing exercise and try to be mindful of what is happening within themselves and then their surroundings. So this has helped them, first of all, to reduce on the rates of suicide, because like I was telling you in the beginning, there's been a very high increase in the levels of suicide in the refugee settlements, and this is partly because people are having severe trauma and severe psychological problems which go unattended to. So bringing this on board helps them to also identify other people outside who have gone through a similar situation, who want to take off their lives because they feel like it's an empty space in the world. It's an empty space where we cannot be in position to, you know, to continue. We've lost hope. We can't move on. So this is the success me I see. I've registered this, and I am experiencing a high number of people who want to join my group. But you know, as you start the group, you have a limitation to how much you're going to take into the group. But that does not mean I have to neglect someone with a traumatic, you know, event. I attend to them individually and let them know that I also care about them, and I'm not trying to leave them out of coming into this group. So that is what I can say about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the second part of my question has more to do with government and systems. And, you know, in our country, our new president has talked a lot about closing borders to certain immigrants and certain, you know, cross-border migration. And I just wonder if you have any opinion about that, or...
Well, in my country, the government is very supportive of refugees. Ugandan borders are open for refugees, and they are not about to close them.
Yeah.
So we have a very good policy for refugees, and they are still coming to Uganda. Yeah.
It's a sanctuary.
Yeah, it's a sanctuary for refugees at the moment. That's why I said it has the best refugee policy in the world, and people are coming to learn from Uganda. Yeah.
Uganda is very central to the refugee crisis in Africa. As actually Jordan is central to the refugee crisis in the Middle East.
I really appreciate this, and there's something I just feel like I just want to say thank you personally for the work you're doing. It's really important work. It's really moving to hear about it. Is there anything else you want to add, or any?
Let me add on something. Now, after this conference, it's my feeling that I want to go and expand this more. I want to recruit more people into groups, and I want to also attract interest from other humanitarian organizations to appreciate what we have already started, because this has started on a small scale, but the plan is to grow it up in future. Let me sell the idea to other people within the humanitarian work, and then they can be in position to appreciate it. Their capacities are built to do it, because I can't do this alone. There are so many refugees, there are so many people who have the need to receive these services, and we are looking at getting more capacity in a more integrated manner because it's hard. It's a field which is not grown in my country, but yet the need for the service is high, especially among the refugees who are coming into the country.
So you asked, Jenna, about sustainability. I think about sustainability and scalability. So it would be part of the pilot project to kind of ground this in Uganda is, next steps would look like, there's another gentleman who's not here named Kizito that is also very active in knowing and interrelating all the different humanitarian organizations. And Isaac is very knowledgeable about, boots on the ground, who's where. So to go back, and the goal would be to every year train, maybe twice a year, do a training for, 200 humanitarian aid workers or more.
Yeah.
And then you do a 4-day training where you're actually explaining the neurobiology of trauma and also doing in vivo practices. So, and teaching people how to teach them in dyads, in small groups, and in large groups. And then also teaching, and this is actually some of the pieces that Isaac didn't get, so it's because he had to leave early because there was this crisis.
Yeah.
But to also teach a lot about an acute crisis protocol model that does not re-traumatize based on neurobiological frameworks, like not going into the graphic details, tracking the body to make sure, because there's a lot of, just have people tell their story is not helpful.
Right.
So sort of putting in the do no harm pieces, teaching from a neurobiological perspective, which transcends religion, race, ethnicity, tribal consideration. I mean, it's like the nervous system. We all have the same nervous system and gender, right? And then teaching it, but teaching it in the context of putting your own oxygen mask on first. So then we have the next step is we have this amazingly elegant online program that's now 8 weeks, and you haven't seen the new version of it where it's like it's all online with audio recordings.
Okay.
And you can get downloaded on your phone, and you have a chat place and a materials place, and then there's and so like this is what we're doing with my Harvard team, many of whom you will meet tonight. They are all in the portable comm. I've got five groups going online right now, and many of those people will be there tonight. So moving it out in this very scalable way, so that what you're doing is you're teaching a crop of people who then become instructors.
Yeah.
And then they, it's a train the trainers model.
Yeah.
So then what you have in 5 years, and if Isaac can do portable comm groups for kids and adults, maybe 1 or 2 groups a day, and we've got 1,500 instructors that are doing a couple of groups a day, and those groups are maybe between 20 and 30 people. Think about the scale of what we can reach with these very simple calming strategies on the front lines of trauma.
Yes, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I feel this really interesting, and this might be a question that just doesn't get answered, but you're relating to kind of the aftermath of such intense violence, and I almost think this program would be better for the people who are inflicting this violence in some way. And I know,
I certainly wouldn't deny perpetrators the program, but it's really getting access to them. I also think it's really, you raise an interesting point in that more opportunities for pre-deployment would be like really vital.
Exactly.
Right? And so we're really trying to get enough of this out into the Ugandan infrastructure to be able to create pre-deployment from the perspective of duty of care, because of the Norwegian case where, like these humanitarian aid workers were kidnapped. One guy was shot, one guy was executed. They arrived from Norway and where was it? Kenya, I think it was. And within 2 days they were kidnapped. And then they had this horrible week, and then they were rescued by an elite Somalian, an elite team. pulled out and sent back to Norway like this. They had no pre-trauma training, no pre-deployment training, no post-training. And they actually, one of the guys, the guy that got shot, pressed a law case against the NGO and won $350,000 in a precedent-setting case that says each NGO really has a duty of care. So it's like the timing of this is they're finally realizing that this isn't just a luxury to care for the caregiver.
Right.
It's an absolute necessity.
It is.
And it's an economic sustainability necessity, because when you put that much energy into training somebody and they can't stay on the job for more than 3 years, or they get, they get really traumatized because they have no resources to work with it or to understand it,
Right.
then you're doing harm.
Yes. To the
And-
people who are you trying to,
Yeah.
you would want to be taking care of people.
Yes. Are we there? It's 196? Are we on Seeley Street?
Yeah.
It's 196.
176.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. That was really wonderful to be able to have this conversation.
Yeah, and I can follow up, Jenna, around any other details that might be useful to you.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. Okay.
Okay, you asked the question again.
Okay, so the question was just you were talking a little bit about the violence that these people come from, and then also violence that gets perpetuated within the camps. So I was wondering if you could tell me a little.
There's a vicious circle of violence within the refugees because, one, where they come from, there is violence. And when they come and are settled in the settlements, there is also violence between different ethnic tribes against the others. And then they have violence that they face from the host community. Now, the violence they encounter during displacement is usually by the forces, people involved in combat, the conflicting parties. Then the violence they receive when they're in the settlements because of the different ethnic tribes is that, like, for example, if you put in Dinkas and the Nuers, who are like the dominant tribes in South Sudan, they have deep-rooted tribal and ethnic conflicts, which they carry over to the refugee camps, and camps are managed in a way that Dinkas stay as Dinka communities, Nuers stay as Nuer community, and this is one of the ways we try to manage the issues of violence that escalate as a result of the different ethnic and tribal lines is being done. Then we have violence from the host community against the refugees because of the scarcity and inadequate resources, especially the natural resources. We know that when refugees are settled in a particular location, there is a host community that surrounds that location. Now, the natural and social resources become very minimal to serve the interest of the population that is hosting them, and then the new refugees in the community. So women, when they go to the bush to look for firewood, water, and grass, get affected. This is where sometimes sexual violence occurs between a host community person and a refugee person. The reason comes in because aid is focused on refugees and not on host communities. So sometimes violence is perpetrated by the host communities against refugees because of those lines of support that is being provided to the refugees living out the host communities. So those are some of the violences you can be in position to experience in the refugee settlements.
And make sure everything is ready.
Yeah.
Because it almost is.
Yeah.
And then, handle
And the scarcity of resources are things like just even like water.
Yes. You look at water in terms of the boreholes, in terms of the springs. the influx of refugees make these resources inadequate to serve the interest of the population as well as they themselves. And violence also occurs in these very spots because, like, when the refugees go to fetch water late in the night, on their way back, some of them are sexually assaulted. Yeah, they're sexually violated. It could be by...
That might be a little bit just easier, just in terms of noise.
Yeah, we were talking about resources like water, firewood,
Food.
grass. Yeah, all these resources that are scarce, especially when there is an influx, there is an increased population, all this exact pressure on the limited and the available social and natural resources. Now, for example, sometimes girls and women go to fetch firewood and grass from the forests, and they are violated by the host communities.
Yeah.
Now, they're sexually insulted, they're sexually abused, and then these people who violate them go freely. They are not even
They're not
apprehended.
prosecuted.
They
or
are not prosecuted.
Impunity.
And this adds up to the trauma that they've already gone through during displacement. So you see there is an accumulation of continuous trauma.
Continuous trauma, yeah.
Exactly. And then secondly, sometimes they have to go to fetch water, and because there are so many people who come to the boreholes to fetch water, some people end up to come late for water
Oh, yeah.
when it's dark, and on their way back they also encounter sexual violence. So this is common.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that the people who are the perpetrators, they can't be apprehended at all. Like, it's just not considered illegal, or
That's an illegal activity, and the government of Uganda is against that. It's against the laws of the country.
right.
However, these things happen, like, for example, if it happens in a bush, in a dark place, and this refugee does not know the identity of the person who has assaulted them because they are from the host community, it becomes very difficult to
track it down.
So sometimes these cases go unnoticed.
Yeah.
But also, there is violence between the refugees themselves because there are different cultural beliefs. And let's talk about the cultural background, their ethnic background, and how it's impacting, like, on violence. Within these refugee settings, some of their cultural and traditional practices are against the laws of the country that hosts them. For example, girls as early as 13, 14 years can be married off by their parents because they believe this one is mature enough and can be in position to stay with a man in an effort to get bride price to support their well-being in the refugee setting. So sometimes even cases of rape and defilement that happen within the camp, the parents keep quiet over it because they think they can go behind and negotiate, and then the bride price is paid. So the survivor remains with a lot of pain, with a lot of trauma, and sometimes there is no service to even address the psychological and the mental well-being of that.
And the
And
betrayal.
Yeah. And are they able to talk to that with you and your staff, or is that something that also is hushed by them themselves? because of shame?
Surprisingly, when this happens, sometimes the parents try to hide it because they don't want it to come to our knowledge, knowing that when we have the knowledge, when we have the information, we are going to leak it out to the authorities, and then they will be arrested. So usually what they do, they even go back to their country to go and do.
And what country is this where this
This
specific...
is Uganda.
You're in Uganda, of course,
Yes.
but what population are you talking about that's selling their daughters? Like what?
The South Sudanese refugees.
Yeah,
I'm looking
South
at the
Sudan.
violence,
Sudan. Okay.
Yes, within them themselves.
Okay.
Yes. So sometimes they have to go back to finish the marriage ceremony from their country even amidst the violence which is there, they go to camps where they have cattle, then the bride price is paid there before they come back to the refugee setting.
Wow.
So you can see the vicious circle of
Yeah.
violence that occurs in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what are the predominant, I know you mentioned earlier, I just wonder, like, in terms of percentages, the predominant cultures in the camp, like, which percentage of like, what's the majority, would you say? Which country are people from?
The majority of the population of refugees in Uganda come from Southern Sudan.
Southern Sudan. Okay. Yeah.
That's the majority.
And that's the most active crisis. I don't know if you know that it was last Sunday's New York Times. You might want to archive it.
Yeah.
The cover of the New York Times was South Sudan, a country falling apart. And so they 6 years ago separated from from the north, which was Sudan, and because of all the sort of tribal wars that were going on and the impact on the civilians, and they kind of very idealistically wanted to sort of set up this place that was safe and separate. And what has actually happened is that the same, only worse, has now happened in South Sudan. And so civilians are targeted, and by both groups, by the government forces as well as, and the Dinkas and the Nuers, which are two tribal groups. And so that, because there's a border shared there, that's just floods completely right in. And then when Isaac and I had the blessing of meeting one another, he was scheduled to do the CGP training, and then after that our training, the neurobiology of trauma, the portable calm, the contemplative based trauma. And there was an emergency that weekend that prevented he and 15 of his colleagues from attending the training, because it was an emergency that had happened in South Sudan, near the northern Uganda border, in a refugee camp that was infiltrated by the opposing groups, who created a massacre. And the UN peacekeepers
In the camp?
in the camps, and the UN peacekeepers were so terrified because they couldn't regulate.
Oh
right,
my gosh.
that they cordoned off the staff headquarters, which actually created a situation where there was a slaughtering. They couldn't escape. And they were just the peacekeepers. I mean, I'm not blaming anybody, but it was the worst wrong thing they could have done, is to cordon off the headquarters, because that way there was no escape for those that. And so then they could no longer feel safe in that camp.
Right.
So that particular weekend, there was like another. It was like I think it was like 20,000 more refugees came in that weekend.
That weekend.
Yeah. And that was the weekend right before the training we were doing. And so it was like I never got to actually,
had to go back.
You had to go back. But that's the kind of context that, that's the heartbreak of the context. And that was August.
I mean, that's tragic that at any point the refugee camp can be broken into.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like,
And it was a UN camp. It was not like,
Right.
Yeah, and that happened in Southern Sudan. However, our security situation in Uganda is okay.
Yeah.
And they've tried to contain, and sometimes our forces go to South Sudan to try and support the government forces to ensure that people are evacuated. Like in the last incident, the Ugandan army had to go to South Sudan to evacuate Ugandans who were in South Sudan, so they would get back to Uganda safely. And so many trucks were sent to go and evacuate people. So even those who were not Ugandans, non-Ugandans, had to be evacuated through that intervention. Yeah, so it's not an easy environment, because people have deep-rooted conflicts.
And deep-rooted multi-generational trauma.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
And you think, I'm not even just talking about South Sudan here. I'm talking also about Uganda's history. And that is, in the 1970s, so there was Idi Amin, right? When did that stop? I thought it was like 1983.
Around 80.
83.
Yeah.
And late 70s, and then into 83. And even one of the directors of Makerere University was executed.
Yeah.
So there was there was this kind of context of many people disappeared, many people are executed. It was a terrible regime, frightening. And so then you see, the generational context, the generational outflow, and now, so then there, now those people are now trying to, the descendants of those people, that were adults at that time, are, many of them are working in these kind of refugee settings, right? So they have long time taproots to earlier traumas in their own families, right? On the Ugandan side, right?
Yeah.
And so again, you think about a resource like the Portable Calm about, how retriggering. And let me tell you, psychodynamic psychotherapy does not work in this context.
I can imagine. There are several contexts it doesn't work in. I can imagine. Yeah.
And so, creating safety, creating sanctuary, creating internal sanctuary, creating breath work and a somatic intervention and a contemplative intervention where people can get the skills to re-regulate is pivotal, because we have a sort of a new paradigm for understanding trauma, in that it's not the incident, and it's not even the cumulative developmental trauma that I'm really looking at. We're looking at trauma as a problem of the arousal system in the body and the body's ability to regulate. Mm-hmm. So it's a disjuncture between those systems.
Yeah.
Right? The arousal system and the regulatory system. Mm-hmm. Right? And so all of the symptoms of trauma are basically symptoms of that disjuncture.
Right.
Right? So, yes, it's important to be able to tell a story. And this is a kind of ongoing conversation I've had with my Harvard faculty, is that, it's don't glorify the trauma narrative. It's not all about getting in a circle and telling the story. It's about providing skills so that eventually there is enough psychological calm to be able to reflect upon experience to make a new meaning.
To make meaning. I am so with you.
Right?
So
it's not about, and then I watched a beheading, and then my mother was raped, and then the family was held at gunpoint, and it's like, and what happens when you tell that story? Right? The nervous system just goes right back into living it in the here and now, because that's the way the body works.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And I think something you were saying earlier around this idea of creativity and having the arts and having these things, and because those are all sort of venues or avenues for creating meaning.
And that's why we want to work with Jorge Burmeister, because he really spoke to, there was some interesting panel stuff, but he was the only embodied person there. He even talked about flamenco, Spanish dance. He goes, when you kind of...
It's so true.
And alive.
Yes.
And then the fight and the love.
Yes.
And so he was very embodied in his presentation. It was that works with us. All this other intellectual, psychological,
it doesn't. It just
have you ever been on the front lines of a refugee camp?
Cuts your head off from your body. I know.
It's not easy there. You have to be an artist to do it.
Yeah.
You have to be an artist to survive in this world. You know, it's it is. I mean, I work with women, and I work around the topic of sexuality, and often that's related to trauma. Or just long times of lack or self-judgment or body image issues or all of these different things. And we do a lot of creative arts and art expression. And it's profound. And I think part of the reason it's profound is because I don't call it therapy, first of all. It's just it's art. We're doing theater. But also people are telling their story and creating a new narrative. This is where I want to...
theater.
What's that? It is definitely therapeutic. But,
and it's theater.
Yeah, and it's theater, and it's a way of creating a new character, a new story, a new meaning, and recognizing often and reconciling the old, and having that be witnessed. There's something about, I think, the witness piece too, of putting yourself out there and your vulnerability and being celebrated in that. So it's really powerful. That's really, really powerful. Yeah. I know. I get afraid of like the dying arts in our own country.
Well, it's interesting because one of these, our Italian colleague, it was sort of in a highly intellectual way, was talking about the arts, but there was nothing embodied about it. It was like from here up.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of the large group today. They were talking to this woman was like, I can't, I'm like not able to think. I'm not thinking, like, we need to feel. Like, it's not about thinking anymore,
It's
you
about
know?
feeling.
Yeah.
Feeling and being in the body.
Yeah.
You know, being in sensation.
In sensation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because a lot of times people can't, especially when people are really traumatized, they don't, and also certain cultures just don't teach the language of emotions. You know, so you say, how do you feel emotionally? They may be too frozen to know, they may not have the language to know, but they can tell you, I feel trembly, or I feel something on my chest is tight, or, you know, they can describe the sensations in the body, which are pre-affective states.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And without story. I mean,
and without story, and there's no. I mean, like, to hear that someone's heartbroken or really sad is no more, or is no more important to hear than my stomach is in knots and my chest is tight.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Exactly. I wonder for the two of you, like, being there. I mean, with the story that you both just shared about the slaughtering. I mean, do you sense in your own nervous system as you're there this fear or this hypervigilance or this? Is it constant? I mean, I get curious about your own body, like being in that situation of not knowing, like, well, my refugee camp be the next camp to get.
It's scary, but you know, that happened in South Sudan. It didn't happen in Uganda.
Yeah, it happened in South Sudan.
For us in Uganda, what we do is to provide the host.
Mm-hmm.
The hosting to the refugees. So listening to them talking about this, first of all, is also a scary experience for you, because they can't talk about it so much without breaking down, and you know, it hits you, and you're like, okay.
And that dysregulation dysregulates you.
Yeah, and sometimes you get tempted to ask them to stop talking about it, because you get to feel the effect, and that's where we get a little bit more compassionate. You regulate yourself,
and that's where the portable calm comes in.
Being attacked by the incident you're being narrated. So it's very difficult listening to it.
Yeah.
And if you're not,
and actually, it's not always helpful to encourage the survivor to continue telling the story. Yeah. And what we teach is teach the breathing work, teach the grounding work, and even no matter how long it takes to gather the story, allow them to tell the story from a more regulated place, and stay focused on that,
right?
Rather than collecting the story and being a detective,
right? Because
it's re-traumatizing. Yeah. And you know, I'll tell you what was interesting for me when I first developed this thing called what I call the therapeutic interview, which is to be able to sort of use the body with, you know, in reception centers with wounded community. And this was actually in the Tibetan exile community, and I went to meet with Guchusan, which is the Political Prisoners Association, all of whom had been tortured, and I was wanting to recruit some subjects for our film. We were doing a film on, it's called Tibetan Stories, it's online, you can see it. And I wanted to do one on many faces of political torture. And so I went to the executive director and kind of won his heart over, because I'm not like a young journalist, you know, who's doing a freshman paper and just going to exploit a political prisoner and nothing's going to come of it, you know. I also wanted to reassure the executive director that as a long-time trauma therapist, that I'm very conscientious about the ethics of interviewing a subject, and that I wouldn't even let my director and producer do it. I had to fly in to do those interviews myself because I didn't want to re-traumatize the subjects. Sure. So he was like really moved. Nobody had ever approached him about selecting people from his community with such care. And then he said, I want to tell you something. He said, I don't know really how to explain it, but all the people that are in our network of social services are so terrified about asking these really hard questions that they're not skillful, and they go plowing in because they're actually so anxious themselves. And then they ask the same questions that the Chinese guards who tortured them asked.
Wow.
And I said, wow. So then I said, listen, I'll do a training on how to actually conduct a therapeutic interview instead of a traumatizing interview. If you collect 10 agencies that I can train all at the same time. And so he did, and so I did.
Wow.
I think that was brilliant, because what you've just explained is what happens in our typical refugee.
And see, I want to take that into, when we do this training, I want to take that in.
Please include therapeutic interviewing in the content of what you're going to do, because
See, we did that in the second week.
I have felt it.
Yeah. And you know it's
I
true.
know it.
Yeah.
I get really curious. This is about you, both of you, more
Yeah.
personally. Like, that it's kind of amazing to me, I guess, as I'm sitting here with you, and I admire you already, but that you like have basically decided to go into the heart of like some of the deepest suffering in this world that is like bigger than most people. I think even me, I consider myself relatively educated, and I think the depth of the trauma, even that I've heard of other people who've been staff in refugees, and I've noticed I've talked to them about their vicarious trauma. It's beyond like what I think the typical American ever experiences or actually can ever really even fathom. And I think even hearing it, I'm just so deeply moved, and I wonder about that drive for both of you to be entering into this, like the depth of the deepest suffering in the
heart of
world.
suffering.
Yeah, like
That is where the service is needed the most.
Yeah.
It's where everything is needed the most. And that is why we want to make this happen.
Yeah.
We will have something to write home about in future. But for now, it's a place that nobody has ventured in. It's a place that is in need of this kind of response. And it's also a place where there is little interest for people to go to.
There's no
No
money
one
in
wants
it.
to see
Yeah.
that line of trauma.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to survive there.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
It's not just that there's no money. I mean, it sounds like it's very challenging without these type of practices.
But I
and
started
nearly
my
impossible.
career working with Vietnam vets and refugees from the Pol Pot regime in the killing fields of Cambodia in 1979. And I took Buddhist vows at that time, and I took my Bodhisattva vow. And the Bodhisattva vow, are you familiar with
Yes,
it?
of course, yes.
So I took my Bodhisattva vow I first saw His Holiness in 77, and then I think I took my vows in 78. So there's this vow within Buddhism that you don't pursue enlightenment for your personal salvation. Any awakening that you experience in your life is so that you can serve our greater suffering humanity. And the concept is that we're not free from suffering until we're all free from suffering. So I took my Bodhisattva vows then, and I've never left them.
Yeah.
And I've renewed those vows again and again. And even when I was invited to speak with the Dalai Lama up in the Himalayas, he wanted to speak with me about refugee trauma. And when I was in my personal audience with him, my personal meeting with him, he just sort of held my face, and I just wept and cried. And I couldn't, this is a man who leads a nation of people who've been genocided for 50 years and continue to be. And so he, of course, was very interested. He also knows that the neuroscience, he's very interested in neuroscience. And so he's very interested in all of this, So he wanted to talk with me. And when I was in his presence, even though I could have rolled out all kinds of things to say, I really couldn't say it. I just wept. And all I did was renew my Bodhisattva vow, like personally with him.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, you ask kind of what's the driving
Yeah.
force? I mean, for me, it's an inner vow.
Yeah.
That actually is renewing and transforming and healing at the same time for me.
Yeah.
So I actually don't experience any burnout over
Are you still recording?
it. No. I don't.
Yeah,
I don't,
we
we are.
we're happy to be whenever. I mean, we're just sort of
We're just having an
taking
extended
extended interview, but we're good to re-enter, I think.
No,
fully.
you know what?
Yeah.
I don't know what happened
So
with that
moving to
delivery.
me, you guys.
Yeah,
It's
it
so. I mean,
It's fun to do
just-
this with you, Isaac,
It
and we
is.
know that we're going to do more and more of this.
Yeah.
You could look
Yeah.
on
And,
Amazon
and,
and
and
find
for
out for
me,
yourself.
who is always there, who is feeling it every day, and having learned what I was taught, and how it has
If you do it
impacted
in your
on
room,
me,
and that's where you're
and
sleeping
how it's
tonight,
helping
sure.
me to regulate myself, and also making the people I'm supporting, where I smile on their faces, it drives me to even do it
To do
more,
more.
Do
and
more.
extend the hand
Yeah.
to more
Yeah.
people.
With more internal resources in order to stay with the hard, with the nature of the work on those front lines.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like there's some way in which this work is actually feeding you both.
I would love for
deeply.
Jenna to be in this conversation,
Oh, yeah.
just to say. But she's a little bit of a busy girl
I
at
know
the
you're
moment.
so busy.
She's done some amazing work, and she was with us in Uganda.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she's also a
She's
Dharma
fabulous.
I want
badass.
to hear about it. I know you're the hostess of this gathering, but I'm in a course right now that's all about refugees, and so I'm just doing it.
And Jenna's also done some additional beautiful work in Nepal.
Oh. Yeah.
Whenever you need or want, I'm gonna.
You guys can do it over Skype.
Yeah,
too.
we do it over Skype. It'd be great.
Where are you located?
I'm
Just
in Boulder, Colorado.
Okay, so that works out.
Yeah, I would love to. I'd love to pick your brain. I mean, I have a personal interest too. I'm going to Cambodia soon, and I wonder about the application of this work to the women who have been sex
Well,
trafficked
we have
in
several people
Cambodia.
from Cambodia in the Portable Calm training right now, and I can at Hagar International, and I
Okay.
can hook you up directly.
That'd be great.
And they're like really benefiting from it.
Okay, yeah,
So,
that'd be
yeah.
great. Because I'm going to be leading a group of Naropa alumni to go on a trip there, and if there's some way that I can learn more personally, and
Do you want to do the next training? You can.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. When does it start for
I'm
you?
gonna go get changed.
Probably.
Okay.
Anything
All right.
you need.
Thank you.
Probably
Chief.
any-
Jenna.
As soon as I want to get about 15 people together,
Mhm.
and then we'll start it. I think it'll be about the end of April.
Okay, perfect. That'd be great
yeah.
training time for me.
Yeah.
And I've sort of already I'm helping do the syllabus, and I said I wanted to be supporting in terms of groups because that's what I know, right? And mindfulness, so that it's kind of really related. I just if there's an effective way that's been tested that you're already doing, and I could use that, I would be so. I mean, it would be great to be able to bring that in that way, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're all in.
Yeah. Great.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you both.
You're
This has been so
welcome.
good, and it's really inspiring for me too to hear from you. I'm just this is it's full circle for me. In the work that I do, I'm working with a really privileged population in Boulder. I'm what does this what does this look like on the front lines of sexual trauma in a really different way, you know?
Well, when it's part of, mass violence, or it's
A
part
systemic, yeah.
I mean, I think the language is mass violence.
Yeah.
That's what we learned in the Harvard
Yeah.
program, anyway. But yeah, it's so when you told the story, Isaac, of something that I actually have pictures of in my head. I think ever since I learned about this when we were in Uganda, of just young girls going out to collect firewood and getting raped. Or worse.
Yeah.
Rape is not the,
It's too much in Uganda,
Yeah.
and it's too much in the refugee setting.
Yeah.
And that's why you see I'm trying to advance this training, and I'm if you're having the next training in Uganda, it should not be in Kampala.
It should be in the
Bring
camps.
it
Yeah.
closer to the refugee setting.
Then everyone can come.
And everyone can come. We
Yeah.
could even go an extra mile and have the refugee leaders participate.
That would be the hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to have that exchange between the refugee leaders and the humanitarian aid workers, and just have that be the community.
Yes. And that's how we can do this.
That is exactly how we can do this. And it occurs to me that if I even were able just to raise a little bit of money to cover the costs of coming over, that we could do it sooner rather than later.
That would be okay. That would be
What kind of
so
fundraiser?
nice.
I think during a fundraiser wouldn't be hard.
if you help me.
Oh, that's what I'm
Would you?
saying.
Would
I
you?
would absolutely help
Yeah.
you. I feel like it's necessary. You know, I have a venue. I have, well, you have your home too, but I own a dance studio that's a gorgeous space. It's very, like, beautifully decorated.
We could do it in
We're
both
going to have an
places.
event there.
We
yeah.
could have a dinner at my house, and we could have an event at
An event,
your
yeah.
studio.
Yeah, certainly.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to. And I feel like it's, especially if we can get, I think this recording is really cool to have here, but just in terms of, like, seeing, and you might already have some recordings like this, but hearing from the two of you about this issue, like, it's like, it's so informational. I feel like a lot of people just don't know. Like, they just don't know. We do really live in a bubble, especially in Boulder. I mean, there's this bubble, right? It's just, there's so much privilege.
That bubble's everywhere.
Right? That bubble's everywhere.
That bubble's
yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Actually, the irony is, I think that as privileged as Boulder can be in terms of, the resources that are in that community, there's a lot of people that have a big heart for a much larger world in that community.
Yes.
And so it is a bubble and it isn't a bubble, because there are people that are actually doing something with their resources. In
Yeah,
that community.
and willing to
my
invest.
primary funders have been wealthy people in Boulder.
Yeah.
So I don't want to
No, it's not that.
Yeah.
It's just, I think that there's probably more people that would actually, because the hearts are so big, if they had more information, education
but
is
if
the
you
gateway.
could help me put a few events
would love
together,
to.
yeah,
I would love
and then
to.
we could get there sooner.
Yeah, I would love to support you in that, because it feels really important. I mean, I actually, I support a lot of causes, but I'm like I don't see what could be more important.
Yeah, well, I think this is the crisis of our time.
Yeah,
we have 65 million refugees in the world, and that includes internally displaced people, and that's a number that has never been reached in humanity. And what we're really talking about here is the horrific risk of multi-generational trauma, and also, as a function of that, the risk of the much higher risk of gang and terrorist recruitment among adolescents.
Yeah.
Both, I would say both male and female. And so when when you hear me be really fierce in a meeting that's unconscious, around an unconscious kind of scapegoating of the technician, I mean, it's like, it's because,
it has to stop.
It's
like
because
Vajra's clarity. That's
yeah,
the
and
clarity.
that is.
Yes.
I was dancing on
Yeah,
toes.
that is it.
You know.
And I feel that. I feel the importance of that.
I'm not at all afraid. I mean, in my personal relationships, I am one of the calmest, most loving people you'll ever meet. But when it comes to this stuff, I am, and it's part of my vow.
Yeah.
It
is. Yeah. I think it's important, and I think that there's also a lot of shame that gets associated with female aggression in particular. It's like, men are allowed to be angry, but women aren't, or something, especially in this community. And I voiced that actually in my institute. I was like, I actually think anger is an opportunity to wake up and to cultivate change and to bring us closer. And it actually is the necessary force to
But
establish
scapegoating is not.
No.
Right? And that's what I was enraged about.
Right. And the brilliance of what you did was that Earl was in the spot of potentially being, he was being a lot of attention given to him, but you brought it to, and how can we how can we meet here? Like, how can we find a way? Like, what consciousness needs to change in order to find that meeting? And I think that was clear too, because I think that the potential is to then scapegoat the perpetrator, it goes back and forth in a way.
Sort of to really appeal to, whatever lack of awareness is within him as within all of us is within me.
Right.
And how can we preserve that kind of fierce Vajra stance around anything that perpetuates harm, and at the same time, how can we be humble enough to realize that there's so much each of us don't know, and that it's outside of our awareness, and we're clueless, and we can't see people can't see people don't know what they don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so true. It's so true, and you often don't
you
know.
You were gone actually, but what I did in the large group today, Jenna's kind of talking.
Yeah.
Was I matched the fierceness of yesterday with a direct appeal to Earl, saying, I think perhaps the heat of my outrage was my contribution to stopping the potential dialogue between us, and that might be my cluelessness. But I'm not going to not celebrate my fierce protest of what I think is harmful. And at the same time, I will, we are human and we are vulnerable to not knowing what we don't know. But our job is to not remain clueless.
Our job is to not remain clueless. And to my point, I was like, and if we make a mistake, how do we use this to develop our awareness?
But I was also saying, you can't apologize if you don't know what you did.
Right.
And he does.
And that's why the apology feels like not enough.
Because he doesn't know.
I'm sorry, but.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I think this is actually about the unconscious in the group. And I'm sorry, but. I'm sorry, but. I'm like, no, Earl. And I'm sorry, period. Because that's the recognition.
Says you don't say I'm sorry, but.
It's like the recognition that I made a mistake. Like, that's the most courageous thing you can do.
Yeah.
And it's the most difficult in a certain sense,
And that's what I was doing. I was coming in with my mistake.
Right.
My mistake was to go too hot, and I won't stop protesting.
I don't think it was a mistake.
Well, it may not have been.
I don't know. And it wasn't there. Yeah. I think it was necessary, and I think it was a voice for so many voices in the room that don't have that voice. Gaea. You know what I'm saying? It's like, when there's a time there's different types of anger on behalf of yourself, anger on behalf of others, but when you see people that don't have a voice, I think it's our obligation as allies to step up and to represent that voice, so that it doesn't have to be this woman in the room who's like, I'm the angry person, I'm the angry woman in the room. Like, no, we're doing that work on behalf of one another. Is that we're saying this isn't right and this is why. We have to do that because that's our role, and we have a different type of privilege, to be able to say it. And a lot of people are silenced and feeling that anger internally.
Isaac was so funny. He was like, I've never seen you like this. You're like,
whoa.
She's like, this is my American mommy. She's just
I
so
wish I was
easy.
there. Maybe I'll get we're recording a large group.
Fierce mama comes.
Mama bear. Yeah. Because you're standing for rights. You're standing for human rights. You're standing for, justice. And then other people were like, how did he get so far up in the organization and have this kind of... And I'm like, that's the thing, it's insulated. These views become so insulated. Yeah. Which does...
Well, because he... because he's stuck around for a long time, and he's led a lot of institutes, and because he teaches a particular model that some people are quite interested in. And you could tell by the people that were not able, out of their ideology, it's like the Republican Party, they're not able out of their ideology to see the harm that's being created.
Right.
But that's true of any ideology.
Yeah.
Cannot see the harm that's being created in Nazi Germany, cannot see the harm that's being created even in the harm of the Catholic Church. What has happened over the, over the hundreds of years, even with the good intentions of the Catholic Church, or the good intentions of the Buddhist religion, or the good intentions of Islam or Judaism, or,